My name is Cheryl Allison, and I'm the director of Shatter The Silence. And back in the fall of 2017, when this big national reckoning was happening for women with the Me Too movement, I, like many women, felt sort of this rage inside of me and this passion, and I was feeling inspired by all of these women using their voices. And I wanted to do something about it. And so, I had been reading up about Time's Up, which is the big national organization that had started to support women. And I thought, that's fantastic. It's getting a lot of national attention. But grassroots change starts at the community level. So I thought, what is my community of Dallas doing about this? And when I started thinking about it more, I kind of found this sort of constructive fury, for lack of a better word, happening. And I started to think, what if I brought together some different women from different backgrounds, different professions, to see what their thoughts are about the Me Too movement? So that's how it started. I didn't know where it was going to go from there. I invited my best friend, Wendy Watts, who is a program director and a social worker for domestic violence services here in Dallas. So she was my first interview. And we just talked, and I got a professional opinion about this situation and sexual assault from her. And from there, it just started to kind of snowball. And I interviewed a wonderful actress here in the community, Denise Lee, who's a big advocate for many causes. And I was going to interview her, and in the course of the interview, she said, "You should speak to my dear friend, Reverend Yvette Blair-Lavallais, because she has a story to share." She goes, "So let me reach out to her and see if she'd be willing to speak with you." And thankfully, she was, because she's become very prominent in the film, and that's how I met Yvette. And then what was really interesting about Representative Neave, I know of her, I'm a huge fan of hers. I don't live in her district, but if I did, I would vote for her. And so, but I was very proud of the work she was doing, and I had seen her on one of the local news stations speaking about the Me Too movement and about her quest and to help end the backlog of untested rape kits. And I just thought, wow, she is so powerful, I'd love to have her in the film. I didn't know how to get in touch with her. I was, slightly intimidated, like, oh, I don't think, a politician, they're so busy, they're not gonna wanna be a part of this. And I went to the Women's March because I had a lot of people marching in that I had already interviewed. And lo and behold, she was speaking at the rally. And I was like, oh my goodness, and so I filmed her. And then I found her afterwards and quickly told her about the film. And immediately she said, "I would love to talk with you and find out more about it." And so I got, in touch with her and set up an interview with her. And then she graciously then invited me to film her, the Sexual Violence Task Force, which she'll talk to you more about. And so I was so excited that she came on board. And then because of her, when I was filming the task force, Wendy Davis was there because she was partnering with Victoria in that. And then immediately I went up to Wendy and told her Victoria was in it and that I had filmed her and asked her permission that I could use her from the task force. And she said, "Well, would you like to sit and actually interview me?" And I was just so humbled and grateful. And so then I had a really great interview with Wendy. So the film just kept snowballing with all of these amazing women wanting to share their stories, and then the amazing initiatives that are taking place in regards to this issue, which has been really inspiring to me. So I started filming in November of 2017, and we just finished post-production in, let's see, my mind, I think it was in February, end of January. And so it was about a year and almost a year and a half. I'm still doing certain little tweaks here and there, and now we have it sent out to film festivals worldwide. And it's already been accepted into 2. So we're premiering here at the USA Film Festival April 28th. on a Sunday at 7 p.m. At the Angelica on Mockingbird. And then we're also in the Julian International Film Festival in Dubuque, Iowa. And it will be screening the same weekend 3 different times. And then I'm really proud of the film. It was received the Best Documentary Award at the Gold Movie Awards in London. And so we're very proud of that. And then there's a wonderful organization called A Show for a Change. And it was started by a gentleman who worked under the Obama administration in the White House. And he started this organization to help bring filmmakers together with nonprofits or different types of organizations to bring forth change and to use film as a way to bring forth change. So I submitted the film to him because they review them and award them, and it won the Storyteller Award. So we're really proud of that. So it's just beginning, and it's already doing really well. So this is Reverend Yvette Blair-Lavallais, and then, of course, Representative Victoria Neave. Do you want to talk about a little bit about coming on board and your the reason behind why you wanted to be a part of this film?
Absolutely. So let me begin by saying Zora Neale Hurston, an activist, writer from the Harlem Renaissance, she said, if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it. I knew that I could not be silent about what I was experiencing. It was in the fall of 2016, and this was right around the time that the national conversation was around Me Too. It was leading into the presidential election, and we all know about that tape and what was heard on that tape about the person who now sits in the Oval Office. While that was happening nationally, for me locally, I was being assaulted by a member in the church. I served as an associate pastor, and I don't know if you've ever had the experience of someone who continuously comes to you. The legal term for it is called unwanted touch. That's how it's described, is as unwanted touch. That happened to me over a period of 4 months. Every Sunday, I had a person who came up to me and always found some way to grab me, to touch me. It was unwanted touch. So, while that national conversation was happening, I thought, I can't just sit back and be quiet. Even as a person who is a clergy person, we have a responsibility to be a prophetic voice. We have a responsibility to talk about whatever the social issues are. We have a responsibility to say something. And then, because I'm always trying to see where in Scripture are we directed to do something, then I read a passage in Joel. And in the prophet Joel, it says that we have to sound the alarm. And so when I was contacted by Cheryl and she asked me if I would be interested to tell my story, I was like, I can't say no. I have to say yes. I have to say yes. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share my story because, again, there is power in our narratives. And I knew that there were other women that this was happening to. In fact, there were other women who told me that they were experiencing something very similar, not at the same place where I was serving, but other women in the church, other clergy women were experiencing the exact same thing. And they said to me, I'm afraid to say anything because if I say something, I risk losing my job. I risk losing my benefits. I risk losing my pension. And I said, but if you don't say anything, that's the greater risk. That's the greater risk. And so for me, I knew that I had to say something. I have been in contact with, younger girls in the church. And if I didn't say anything and something happened to them, then I felt like they would look back and wonder, why did she not say anything? Knowing that something happened to her, she could have made a difference. She could have said something to make a difference. And so that's what I wanted to do. I took the risk. And I said, enough is enough, and it's time to shatter the silence.
Amen.
Sorry if I was preaching, but
I'm really honored to be a part of this documentary, this film, and want to thank Cheryl for all of the work that you've put in to this and for helping elevate these voices. I also want to thank you for your courage. Right now in these times as women legislators, I'll tell you, there's a small number of us in the Texas House in particular. At the time when we met, there were 29 women out of 150 state representatives. So before the Me Too movement, we had been waving the flag to try to get attention on the issue of, for example, the rape kit backlog in Texas. We have thousands and thousands of untested rape kits just sitting on shelves waiting to be tested. And the state, in my opinion, had not prioritized this issue. And so we wanted to continue the work that former Senator Wendy Davis had done. We also saw that in Dallas, we wanted to make sure, I was very honored to be one of the lead organizers for the Dallas Women's March for the past 3 years. And we wanted to make sure that our city was included in this national conversation. So the Me Too movement, the Dallas women, the women's marches all across this country have helped really kick open the door for us to be able to make more progress in terms of legislating justice. And that's something that we absolutely have to do, because for generations before, we had the laws on the books that we have had not been sufficient to protect women and to make women feel that it was okay to come forward. In fact, women had been retaliated against. So this session right now, because of the courage of women like the Reverend, because of the courage of women all across this country who are sharing their stories, we are in a completely different climate right now in the Texas House of Representatives. Very honored that some of our legislation, just Wednesday actually, I wanted to share, we passed a budget, a House budget, in which we are appropriating $38 million to support testing the backlog of these untested rape kits in Texas. It is unprecedented.
Yes.
We need to pass it in the Senate still, I'll say, but the fact that the state is listening, the fact that women have been raising their voices at the ballot box, we have been electing women all across the country in record numbers, we are making change. And so films like this are going to help us make even more progress in the law and making sure that the laws that we have in place are helping amplify the voices. And so I'm just very, very honored and excited to be a part of this. We're going to continue to work in the areas of sexual harassment in the workplace and making sure that our laws in Texas are, that law enforcement, for example, are trauma-informed, that they have trauma-informed interviewing skills, ensuring that our hospitals and our forensic labs have enough technicians to test all of these untested rape kits. And looking at where along the pipeline our state has dropped the ball. And we're going to continue to work in these areas. And I'm just excited to be here. I look forward to seeing the film and want to do anything that we can. I know we as women, when we come together, we can really, really make change. And we're seeing the progress already from the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement all across the country right here in our own state of Texas.
Absolutely.
Oh, you want
Happy
to
to answer
ask questions?
Yeah.
There's a lot that we could talk about. I'm
Kelly,
sure.
how do you want to moderate it?
Yeah. Do you have
That's
any
so
questions?
funny. Oh, well, one of my questions is, I think she already kind of asked, like, how did she get involved in it? But you went to her and asked her. But you've talked a lot about, like, so many people being supportive, like when you came up and asked them to tell their story. Have you ran into people that were scared to tell their story and didn't want to?
Actually, anybody I asked, they were incredibly open to it. I was actually being contacted because sort of word through my own circle of the theater community here in Dallas, it was sort of spreading, and I had women contacting me saying, if you need anybody else to talk or have an opinion, because I think every woman is so, most women are so inspired by this and wanting to use their voices. And I wish I could have used everybody who wanted to be a part of the film, but, I had to keep it, to a certain length. And But no, I did have one woman who contacted me, and she said, I have a story to tell if you want to hear it. I met with her, not to interview her, but just to talk with her, and she revealed on camera a really personal thing that had happened to her, and she had never spoken about it before, just to a few close friends and her husband. And after we interviewed, she even had to call her children, her adult children, and say, this happened to me, and you don't know it. And so she's told me even today that she feels like this weight has been taken off of her shoulders, and for the first time she feels free because she had the courage to speak up and to speak up on camera. That's really, really courageous. So, and men were coming out of the woodwork wanting to speak, and I definitely wanted a section to represent the male voice, because we have to have men on board. And I always said, just like for any movement, you know, the LGBTQ community had to have the straight community support them in order to move forward with their rights. And women, we need men, good men on board to realize, to help support us and to help with this reconditioning that has to take place from you know, our young boys on up. And so interviewed 3 wonderful men in the film. One you saw in the trailer, Reverend George Mason, who's the senior pastor at Wilshire Baptist Church, a huge advocate, speaking out about patriarchy in the church. And so, yeah, I didn't meet any resistance.
And may I add something? So for every woman that comes forward, there are many that won't, because of retaliation, because of concern of domestic violence in the home, for many, many reasons. And so that's why we have to continue the fight. We have to continue to work to change the culture so that our next generation of little girls, little boys are growing up in a society where they shouldn't have to worry about sexual harassment in the workplace, or that whether they will be believed or not. So I just wanted to add that.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, one thing that I noticed is that when you think of generational, and you think of like older generations, I mean, from my I just spent the weekend with my mother, and so you know, there's a lot of times when she doesn't talk about things. We don't talk about that, and you know, after her sister passed away in 2016, then her granddaughter, her sister's granddaughter, was asking my mom, what is up with this? And my mother's like, I'm not going to talk about that. And so that is something that she grew up with. You don't talk about those things. You don't talk, you know, and it's like she doesn't need to know, and she kept saying she doesn't need to know that.
Right.
And I'm like, but it affected everything from her generation, and you know, down to
It's a ripple effect.
it is,
And it's
total
generational.
ripple. And so
I love the title of your film.
Right.
did you have any anybody of an older generation that was willing to talk, or I mean, did you approach anybody from a generation, you know, above you?
Right. No, you know what? I don't specifically remember approaching anyone from, you know, an older generation. I have a gentleman in the film who's from the older generation, and he has marched in the civil rights movement, and it was in Selma, and he's an amazing man. And he brought a really interesting perspective because of just his background. And now sitting here talking about how we have to recondition boys, and that men need to say sorry to women. That's what he says. And that he says in the film that, you know, when you sit there and you all these sayings that we say, like we tell a little boy, like, oh, you're going to be a lady killer when you grow up. He's like, what does that say to that boy? And what does that make him feel like? So he was bringing a really cool aspect, but he is definitely probably the most senior that was interviewed in the film. An interesting little personal story. When I first started thinking about this, and I think I'd only interviewed a couple of people, I went down to Houston, where a lot of my relatives live, and my grandmother at the time was 98, and I talked to her and I said, you know, Nana, I'm going to do this film. And I told her about it, and she said to me, she goes, you know, there was a whisper network when I was young. And she told me a story. My Nana was widowed at the age of 28. She had 2 young children, and she had to get a job, of course, and it was very scary. And she told me about working at an insurance company where a woman said to her, listen, don't go into the conference room with that man, and don't go to have drinks with him, and don't be by yourself with him at all. And it was this known secret, but they never said anything, they didn't report anything. It was just this whisper network of women protecting each other. And I found that so interesting because one of the other influences for this film was, while I was already starting it, then in one of our theater online news sources outlet here had reported that a pretty well-known director at one of our theaters here in Dallas had been fired for sexual misconduct allegations. There had been an investigation for a year that this news outlet had done. And what came out of all of that was that they realized that the women in the theater community had a whisper network among themselves, saying to be careful when you work there, don't be by yourself with him. But they didn't want to say anything because they were afraid of retaliation. They were afraid they wouldn't work at this theater. Or because it's a small community, other theaters would say, well, I'm not going to hire her because, she complains or she's making complaints. And so I realized that, my grandmother back in, at a young age of 28, and she was born in 1919. So you can imagine that long ago there was the Whisper Network, and then here, there was still I thought so much has changed in her life. She has seen so many things, but the Whisper Network is still there. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting.
I think a woman's body has always been in jeopardy. I think when we think about having agency over our own bodies and always having to find ways to protect ourselves and even set boundaries, our bodies have always been in jeopardy. And so, listening to what both women here are saying and just thinking about what it means for a woman to know that anytime she gets up in the morning and gets started for the day thinking about how might I encounter something, some situation, some person where I have to protect myself.
Right.
And that just shouldn't be. That shouldn't be. And so that's why I think it's so critical, this film. I want to say when I first met with Cheryl, it was just amazing, just her presence, her spirit, and sitting down and having the conversation, and then setting up the time for us to get together to meet, to actually do the interview. And I remember that just different moments where we had to stop and process, what was happening. Because anytime you retell what your story is, you re-enter that trauma.
Right.
And the person who's listening, you are inviting them into that space. And so they are experiencing that trauma as well because they're hearing what you're having to say. And so when you think about that, and then you think about the policies over here, and that's why I'm so grateful for both women, for what Cheryl is doing, for what the representative is doing, is because there are so many layers to this that we just don't even realize and don't even think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you hope to most accomplish with the movie? So you have a viewer, somebody, an audience member sitting, watching the movie. They just happen in. What do you want them to take away from it?
For me, as the director of this film, my biggest goal with this film was that it was going to have a universal message. We're focusing on the community of Dallas and then at the state, the state level as well. But I want anyone, anywhere, internationally, nationally, to see this film and say, I relate to that. That happened to me. Or what is my school saying about that? What is our teachers, are they talking about this? What is our, should I talk to the PTA? Should we start some kind of program? What are some of the community initiatives? Do we have a sexual violence task force? I want to spark that for other communities because to me that's how it grows. And I was very excited. I do have a student aspect. I was very fortunate that Mesquite ISD allowed me to come in because they were one of the only ones that said yes. And North Mesquite High School welcomed me in. I know the English teacher there. That's how I got through.
Oh, great.
Let me tell you, they were great.
I represent Mesquite.
And there's two, and you saw the film, there's two amazing students in this film that for their senior project, they could do, oh no, they were juniors at the time. We were doing a project, they could have done it on anything, but it was supposed to be about activism. And some people were doing, global warming or animal rights or different things. And this boy came in and said, we need to address the Me Too movement. We need to address this. And they formed a website that's called SAFT, Sexual Awareness for Teens, because they said, at our age, we don't listen to our parents. We don't, that happens, right? But you will listen a lot of times to your peers. So it's a place for resources, what no means, all of these different resources on this website. And then another girl started a blog called Hurt Voices, where she writes poetry and people can come together and talk about maybe something that had happened to them and give them a safe space to talk with each other and have support. I was blown away by these kids. And so I hope that they can attend the premiere, but that was exciting. So I would love for another community, to answer your question, say, what could I do at my school? And so far the feedback, knock on wood, people have related to it and they don't just feel like it's a Dallas film.
Yeah.
So, hopefully then we'll get distribution and a lot of people can see it and keep the conversation going. Because I don't think it's ever going to go out of date. Right? I mean, I hope one day it's completely irrelevant, but it takes a long time to steer patriarchy that has been going on since biblical times. So you don't just steer that ship overnight, but you do it by the steps that we're all doing in our own individual ways. And every single amazing, woman and men that are in this film, their voices.
I think since so many cases came out, like in the entertainment industry, at least some of the, higher ups are thinking twice about like Carlos or hotel or outdoor places. So that's one good thing that came out of some women speaking up.
And when I first started too, I didn't know, was this film going to just but would it just contain Me Too stories? Was it going to be that? Which is incredibly important. But then what started to develop, which was really exciting, was then you saw change that these women have done because of either, a horrific situation that they had been in, and the change, or the initiatives, like, Victoria's doing, that showing the change that's happening. So like for Yvette, didn't just sit in her victimization, then started with two other powerful women, a church, a womanist church, that's addressing patriarchy in the church. That's inspiring. And so I wanted it to have that element as well, to balance the other very incredibly important stories of women, expressing their thoughts and personal experiences.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's about watching the film and saying, how can I be an advocate for women who are experiencing this? Because again, you've got so many women who are afraid to speak up. And they don't have the courage yet to be able to say it. But if you're watching this film, set aside whatever presumptions you have. Believe a woman the first time. And ask yourself, how can I be an advocate? That's one layer of it. For me, the second layer is really the language around sexual harassment, sexual assault, because I think people don't realize unwanted touch is considered sexual assault. And so when we hear a person say, this guy passed by and slapped me on the butt, that's sexual assault. Maybe 30 years ago, we didn't have that language for it, and maybe it was considered something that, oh, he's just doing that and you have to take it and move on and not say anything. But I really think it's important to begin to have the conversations around the language of what it means, so that when a person comes forward to say, I've got a situation where this guy continues to touch me all the time, or he leaves these notes, or he, does this or says something, that you have to define it for what it is and then take that next step. So the first one would be advocacy. The second would be conversations around the language. And then thirdly, what I hope what would happen is when people watch this is Wherever it is that you work, go to HR and find out what is our policy that says if something like this happens, what are the steps that need to take place so that a person feels comfortable enough to come and report it and to know that there's going to be something done that happens. That's what I hope people will do. That's what I hope.
I'm hoping people will see that voting matters and that their vote really does count and can make a big difference in changing our laws, and that we need more women to run for office. All across the state, at every single level, we need more women to run for office.
You know what I want to throw in? What was interesting, I had some feedback from someone who saw the film that was in London, where it was honored with that award, and the feedback was, we were so excited about the film anyway, right? They love it. They love the stories in it and the women and the subject matter. But they said because it was focused on Texas, on Dallas, it made it even more interesting to them, because we all know that Texas, there's a perception about Texas around the world, right? And a lot of people wouldn't think that this kind of grassroots initiatives and is happening here in Dallas. So if this film would have been based in New York, or Los Angeles or New York City, people would be like, oh yeah. Of course they are, But then here we are in Texas, and they're like, that's cool. Like, look at Texas. And that was important to me because, I've lived most of my adulthood in New York City and Los Angeles, but I'm a Dallas girl, born and raised. And so I'm proud of my city, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud to have people like Reverend Yvette and Victoria, representing our state and our districts and here behind the pulpit, because there's just a perception that that's not there, because all of the other extreme is what's usually shown. So I also hope, people think, oh, Dallas is doing it, boy, we better step up and do it. Yeah. So, I was proud of that. I'm proud of the city and the people in the city that are doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say that, what sets this film apart, I think, a little bit for me when I've seen other, coverage on the Me Too movement is having the church involved, frankly. I think that's huge, because I feel like that's a conversation that I've even had with my own family members when we don't agree politically. One thing that comes up a lot about politics or religion is like, why the silence,
Right.
And I think that addressing that and pulling more people into the conversation that way is so positive. Whether you're part of that religion or not, it's just great for everyone. So I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think, I appreciate you saying that. I think it's so important because the church is one place where patriarchy is still alive. I mean, right, when you think about the hardships that women experience, especially clergy women, to be able to rise to a position of authority, that's the biggest hurdle that we face, and because we deal with patriarchy. And so it's so important for us to assemble together men and women and say, what can we do to dismantle patriarchy, to take this wall of patriarchy down, because it's been that way for so long. Men have always ruled the church. Men have always been the authority figure. So men have always been supported where women have not. And I don't know of any other place where it's that prevalent. It's so prevalent in the church. And so it's important for the church to begin to have these conversations to say, what's happening that we're not honoring the women in the church? What's happening that we're not honoring their position, their title, their authority in the church? And what are some things that we can do to make sure that no other clergy woman has to go through something like this? Because there's no reason on a Sunday morning, as you're getting ready for the worship experience, that you have to concern yourself with walking into a situation where the walls of patriarchy are this high, and that if there's anything that you say, you automatically won't be believed, you won't be supported, because all of that support automatically goes to the male, even when that male is the predator. That support still goes to him, and it's because of the patriarchy.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting, when I was talking to somebody about doing this film, there's been some feedback, you know, just from people in my inner circle or whatever, where a couple of guys said, you know, well, should I come to the film? Is it a bunch of male bashing? And I'm like, see, why would you automatically think that the film is male bashing? Because you see powerful women using their voice.
Right, right.
See, it's not a reflection of that, but that's just that ingrained patriarchy that is, you know, and so, in fact, the political section is titled in that chapter, Patriarchy in Politics, because, you know, I'm sure that's a reason why funding hasn't been given to the backlog of rape kits, because maybe it hasn't been a priority in the past, right? And the lack of parity with women. So, yeah, it's just very interesting.
I think it's more the process of establishing that we honor women the same way we honor men.
Yes.
Right.
And what that means. So so now we've got the message that we want an audience member to get. What did you take from the movie? Like you've been through the whole process from dreaming of it to seeing it out there now. Do you feel different? Do you feel the same? Are you scared? Are you excited? Where are you at?
Oh my gosh! I could go. My head is still spinning. Well, from a director standpoint, you know, I couldn't be more proud of this film. You know, and I'm not going to get emotional, but I have to tell you, I am so humbled and honored to have these women and men in this film. That it's a documentary, you know, they're giving of their time. They're giving of their time today. You know, this is not a paid gig, you know, nobody's making money. And so the thing is, it's a passion project, right? That's what it is, but it's because we all believe in that. So I feel so honored that the people in this film that are featured, that they trusted me. Because some knew me, some really good friends, but these two didn't know me. They didn't know me at all. So I just had to say, please trust me that I'm going to honor your story. I'm going to honor you, and that I'm trying to do the right thing. And they did. And so I feel a little bit overwhelmed that it's finally done, because when you're with something basically a year and a half, I was still doing some things for the film yesterday. You know, it's going to be going crazy till right up to the last minute. But so also because I didn't just direct it and film it, but I edited it. So when you edit a film, you know every aspect. I know every word that every person who interviewed says. I mean, I could just say the film out loud. And so I know their breath. I know when they smack their lips. I know them so intimately, right? Because you have headphones on, you're watching everything and you're editing it perfectly. And so you really, I've relived it. So where she, you know, you kind of take on either the trauma or the stories or whatever you're listening to. I've sort of been with that for a year and a half, and that, you know, that's a lot. And then, you know, and then choosing the music. So it's the biggest challenge that I've ever done. I'm an actress, and so to do this, but I'm really, really super proud of it, and just overwhelmed with, you know, gratefulness, just filled with gratitude. Yeah. That these amazing people came together to try to make a difference.
I think one thing that's interesting to me is like it's church and it's politics, and those are like the two industries pretty much that have the major cover-ups, though.
Right.
Like, you know, when you think about the Catholic diocese, and you know, all the cover-ups for that, and like there is so much that goes on in politics with the women that are there, but you don't really see them really speaking out about it. So I thought that was very interesting that, you know, you covered like both of the major.
I could do a whole documentary probably just on the church itself. Oh, yeah, you know, what's interesting, I have so much, I thought, wow, you know, I could do a documentary short just on Yvette. And who says I don't? Someday, right? Just on that and moving forward, and where you get a little more into the details, because when you have 57 minutes and I have 8 chapters with a lot of different things, you know, you can only go so far into all the work that Victoria's doing and the Sexual Violence Task Force. You know, we could get into it where I showed footage of everybody there talking. I wasn't able to do that because, you know, there were many stories to tell in a certain time frame, but you know, there's so much footage there. You just never know, you know, where we could also, you know, I could re-edit some things and move forward with other stories to do specific You know, Shatter the Silence, the church.
The church.
Shatter the Silence, politics, you know.
Yes.
But you never know, yeah.
And I think back to what you were asking, for me, the film is about healing. So I appreciate Cheryl for her passion, for wanting to sit down, her willingness to do this film. And when I think about all of the people who are a part of it, not just the voices that are in the film, but everybody behind the scenes, the production team, everybody who's a part of it, for me, it represents a community. It represents a space of healing. It's that journey of healing that you have to go through. And every time I see that trailer, that says to me the healing, because you have to be able to get your healing somewhere. And oftentimes that healing comes when you're in a community of people who, one, may have experienced something very similar, or two, who are just willing to sit with you and to listen to your pain and to affirm you in your pain. And so that's what this film, that's why it's so powerful. That's why Shatter the Silence, for me, is about healing. And that's what I get from it. I get the healing from it.
Have a lot of people came up to you after this film, like from the congregation or some of the little girls?
Do they know
or-
yet?
This will be the first.
Well, they haven't seen it
This is
because
the
see,
first
the
preview.
premiere is April 28th.
Right.
So no one had, they haven't even seen the film.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
we haven't
true.
seen it.
But, so you all have seen something that they have not,
But the trailer,
Yes.
so the trailer, because it's out, then people who've seen the trailer, I've been contacted by people who have said to me, thank you for having the courage to speak up. Here's what happened to me, and I couldn't say anything, but I'm glad that you're speaking up for all of us.
Mm-hmm.